The Sega Genesis is an obvious answer to a lot of different questions, like, I want to get into Sega games, where should I start? Sega Genesis. I want to get into retro games, where should I start? Sega Genesis. There's nothing to eat for dinner, what should I have? Boom, Sega Genesis. The thing is, as easy as it is to recommend Sega Genesis, there's a lot of different ways to do it. Not only does the console have an extensive and well-rounded library of games, but the hardware itself is a cornucopia of possibilities, and as usual, that's where I like to start. Despite all the different choices, most people still tend to choose between a Model 1 or a Model 2, as those are the units most people think of when they think of a Genesis. I always like the Model 1 myself. It just looks like serious business, like it's the adult in the house. Of course, besides looks, there are some more practical reasons to choose the Model 1, most famously the sound. The Genesis has gotten a bad rap over the years for having poor sound quality, and I think a lot of that could have been avoided had people just been playing on an earlier Model 1 Genesis. Yeah, some developers didn't know how to utilize the sound hardware properly, but something that often goes under the radar, more so back in the day than now, is how poor the sound quality of a Genesis Model 2 can be compared to a Model 1. Doesn't help that most people back in the day had a Model 2 Genesis that they just plugged in with an RF cable and called it a party. So how do you get better sound out of a Genesis? Well, like I said before, you want to look for a Model 1, and specifically the one that says high definition graphics on the top. Not only is that label good for some late 80s irony, but it also signifies that you have an earlier model of the console and a pretty safe bet for good sound hardware inside. However, keep in mind that there are different motherboard revisions, the potential of people having done case swaps, modifications that can be performed, and all that usual jazz. But if you're looking to keep things simple, a Model 1 Genesis with high definition graphics written on it is a pretty safe bet. Of course, you'll want to take advantage of the incredible stereo sound offered by many Genesis games, and you'll want to do this by extracting it from the console's headphone jack. Just make sure whatever cable you plug in there finds its way to your TV or sound system. And if you want one more little tidbit, flip your Genesis over and take a look at the underside. Locate where it says FCCID, and if it matches this exactly, it's no 100% guarantee, but there's a good chance you have what is called a non-TMSS console. With a description like that, how could that not be something good? Well, if your console is a non-TMSS console, then you won't have to look at this screen every time you boot your Genesis up, because who's got the time to wait a few extra seconds to get into the game? Oh, and you may notice that people will sometimes try to jack up the price on these models, but luckily there's a pretty simple solution for that. Just find somebody selling one who's unaware of what TMSS even means, and check the bottom until you find one with the magic ID number. Bada bing, bada boom. But what about all these other choices? Well, Genesis hardware alone could take up an entire series of videos. After all, Sega loved their hardware and went absolutely buck wild during the Genesis era. My personal suggestion is that the Model 1 is the best bang for your buck if you're looking at original hardware, so I'll leave it at that for now. Controllers are a much more straightforward proposition. Dang it, Sega. Well, for more traditional controllers, the decision is pretty straightforward. Most people are going to be choosing between the 3-button and 6-button controller. I'll give you 2 guesses which one people prefer. The 6-button controller is arguably one of the best controllers ever made. It's very similar to the Sega Saturn controller, and you know how much we all love that thing, and especially the D-pad, which I would say pretty much feels perfect. It's got those famous 6 buttons available, and even though the majority of games don't even use these, you're covered in the event that you want to play a fighting game, because nobody wants to play a fighting game forced to press start to switch between punches and kicks like some sort of deranged animal. Sega did offer some other less traditional options as well, and first-party stuff too, like their arcade sticks that again came in both 3-button and 6-button flavors, and they even had official wireless controllers. Yes, Yes, you heard me right, and of course those can be hard to find and expensive when you do. But let's talk about games now, typically the juiciest part of collecting for any console. And yeah, I know what you're probably thinking. You didn't talk about power supplies yet. What the heck, dude? Actually, we probably should talk about power supplies because brace your eyes for this, it ain't pretty. The main thing here is that you just don't get cocky. Always double check the model of your power supply and make sure it matches the hardware that you're going to use it for. The more hardware you add, the more complicated it can get. Alright, let's get to those games. What's kind of weird about the Genesis library, given how popular it was, is that a lot of its best games didn't get a ton of attention back when the console was current. At least not as much as they deserve, that's for sure. One of the biggest examples of this that I like to bring up would of course be Ristar, or Ristar, depending how you like to say it. Here we have a game that is arguably just as good as anything else on the system, and yet lots of people who owned a Genesis back in the day never played it. Sure, it was a late release, but then how do you explain a game like Thunder Force 4 that was released right in the heart of the console's life cycle? Arguably the best shoot 'em up of the entire 16-bit generation, and yet tons of Genesis fans missed out on it. I would have liked to have known about it. Point is, whether you had a Genesis back in the day or not, odds are there's going to be some games that you missed out on and games that are awesome. Something really dumb that I hear every now and then is that the Genesis only had Sonic and that was it. To which I immediately think, no, Sonic just had the most mainstream visibility since he became the console's mascot. Let me throw a bunch of Genesis games at you real quick that are just as good as Sonic. Shinobi 3, Gunstar Heroes, Shining Force 2, Thunder Force 4, Musha, Streets of Rage 2, Earthworm Jim, Revenge of Shinobi, Dynamite Cop, wrong Sega console, but still a good game, Comic Zone, Truxton, Dynamite Heady, Contra Hardcore, Castlevania Bloodlines, Castle of Illusion, Aladdin, Alien Soldier, so on and so forth. The Genesis does a good job of covering all the genres that one would associate with the 16-bit era. Platformers, you betcha. Action platformers, also you betcha. Run and guns, oh yes. Games with the main character made out of green balls, check. RPGs, maybe not as many as Super Nintendo, but people swear by Phantasy Star 4, and Shining Force 2 is a great take on the strategy RPG genre that was much more elusive back then. Shoot 'em ups, maybe not as many as the TurboGrafx 16, but still a good chunk and a lot of top tier quality stuff. Whatever genre you're into, you should be able to find something that you like. I've also noticed a lot of people mentioning that Genesis games tend to be challenging. Welcome to the world of retro gaming is what I say to that. This especially makes sense given Sega's heavy arcade roots, but there are still some easier games for the console, such as Castle of Illusion, a sentimental favorite for many, as well as its sequel World of Illusion, which added in co-op play, always a welcome addition. Now, as far as price goes, there was a long time when prices for Sega Genesis stuff was pretty cheap, and even at a time when prices for a lot of Super Nintendo stuff was shooting through the roof. But the Genesis is just too darn good to go very unnoticed for long. Here's my theory. People collecting Super Nintendo games thought to themselves, hey, I like 16-bit games, what should I collect next? How about Sega Genesis? Alright, so what exactly am I trying to tell you then? You missed the boat? Tough crap for you? Well, not exactly. There are still a handful of great games that are affordable. As much as I've been banging on about the Genesis being so much more than just Sonic games, there are still those Sonic games, and the main ones are great if you're into that style of gameplay. There are, of course, some other games for the console as well, where the prices haven't gotten as wild as the rest of the library. Another little trick that can help get the price down is if you just collect the cartridges loose. That's what I do. The clamshell cases are really popular to collect for these games because of how, let's just say it, cool they are, but they do increase the price, and cartridges are something that I feel stand well on their own. Plus, this is more of just a personal opinion that I'm guessing lots of people will disagree with, but the tabs that hold the cartridges in make removing those cartridges feel a little too Jaws of life for my liking. I just think it could feel a little smoother. Okay, what about the infamous, or famous, depending who you talk to, add-ons for Genesis. Well, some people consider these to be their own entire systems, but they do attach to the Genesis, so it's kind of hard to separate them. Between the 32X and Sega CD, I definitely notice a lot more people supporting the Sega CD, and I tend to agree with that personally. Regardless, neither the 32X or Sega CD had any games on the Genesis Mini, and almost nobody complained about this. In fact, personally, I didn't see anybody complaining. So take that for what it's worth. I really think, if nothing else, the base Genesis is a very worthwhile console. It embodies what's great about retro gaming in so many ways. 2D pixel art, pick up and play gameplay, creative characters, D-pads that don't suck. The Genesis has earned its place at the retro gaming table and would likely make itself right at home with any retro gamer. Of course, there's an endless amount of things that could be said about collecting for the Genesis, what with all the various ding-dongs and doodads Sega released at the time. So, for this video's question, besides any general tips you may have when collecting for the console, I'd like you to mention what you think is the most interesting Sega Genesis collectible. Personally, I would say the Mega Jet, which was kind of like a weird handheld that you could plug into a display during Japanese plane flights. Talk about being the cool person on the plane with that setup. Alright, but that'll do it for my thoughts. Be sure to share yours, and I will see ya in the next video.
He's the retro bird, yeah. And he's talking about video games. He's